for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to all member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, The Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries
This is
Uno,
español.
dos, uno, dos.
Vamos a probar con webcast. Un segundito. Un segundito. Ok, 1, 2, español. Ok, segunda consola, por favor. Perfecto. English booth, please.
Hola, hola. English booth, Allison. Oh, thank you.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Dwayne. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Portugués. Probemos portugués. Se escucha bem. Segunda consola. Hola, hola.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo de lo público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Center's program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Hoy, esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos, no podemos ser neutrales.
than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, The Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Center's program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused, and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
To consider the matter empowering of women as catalyzers of sustainable peace and inclusive security, best practices across the Americas. Before starting this meeting, I would like to ask the Secretariat if we have the regulatory quorum to start the session. Very good. We are able to move forward. We have quorum to hold this session. And before starting this session, I would like to respectfully ask that we have 1 moment of silence for the victims of the aircraft accident that happened last night. And we would like to extend our deepest condolences to the United States and family members. Thank you very much. Given that we have the quorum, I would like to start this meeting of the Committee on Hemispheric Security, convened by the chair to address the matters on the draft agenda CP/CSH 2290/25, and this was submitted to your consideration. Given there are no comments, it is so approved. The agenda is so approved. Dear colleagues, it is a pleasure to warmly welcome you to this important joint meeting of the Committee on Hemispheric Security and the Inter-American Defense Board regarding the participation and the leadership of women on the matters of peace and security. It is a matter of great relevance in which we have been making great progress. A significant example of this is the fact that our committee, once again, is led exclusively by women under the direction of our chair and our vice chair. The agenda of women, peace, and security has become a fundamental pillar for the political and international frameworks to promote gender equality and strengthen the role of women in consolidating peace, security, and defense. It is anchored in the historic Resolution 1325 from the year 2000 of the UN Security Council. This agenda highlights the key role that women play in preserving and resolving conflicts, as well as the processes of rebuilding after conflicts. The UN has recognized this for quite some time, the link between gender equality and sustainable peace. Resolution 1325 and its relevant resolutions advocate for increasing the participation of women in decision-making roles at all levels when it comes to peace and security. 2, protecting women and girls from gender violence, especially in the context of conflict and post-conflict. 3, addressing the structural causes of the conflict and violence, including inequalities when it comes to systematic matters on gender. And 4, ensuring gender focus in humanitarian efforts and when it comes to rebuilding after conflicts. At the OAS, our commitment reflects the growing acknowledgement of the key role that women play in building a safer and more equitable future in the region. The member states of the OAS have made wonderful advances in aligning our strategies, our national strategies, with the UN agenda on women, peace, and security, as well as the promotion of its objectives. Nonetheless, there are joint challenges. Among them, cultural practices that get in the way of gender equality, institutional resistance to change, a lack of resources which limit the full implementation of the agenda goals, and a lack of exhaustive information on the participation of women in security roles, which causes problems when it comes to effective mediation of progress. In order to overcome these obstacles, it's key to prioritize an increase of financing for the WPS initiatives, that is Women, Peace, and Security. We need greater cooperation across the region through platforms such as the ones that the OAS offers, and we need continuing promotion of gender equality and spaces for opportunity. This meeting is a wonderful chance to exchange best practices and to strengthen our joint efforts in the empowering of women as catalyzers of sustainable peace and inclusive security. Now we will hear presentations from experts on this matter, and I would like to highlight the Minister of the Interior and Police of the Dominican Republic, Dr. Faride Raful, as well as the Executive Secretary of the Commission on Women, Alejandra Mora Mora. We hope that these presentations will motivate the delegations to have constructive dialogue and strengthen your advocacy and help us to promote this agenda. I now give the floor to the Executive Secretary of Mr. Flavio Luis Oliveira Pinto. I would give you the floor now. Thank you. Thank you very much. Ambassador Baños and other members of this council. I will speak in Portuguese now.
Ambassadors, delegates, members, good morning. First, on behalf of all the members of the Inter-American Defense Board, we would like to express our deepest condolences for the tragic airline accident that took place last night in Washington. At this time of pain, we express our solidarity to the families of the victims, to their friends, and all of those that have been hard hit by this irreparable accident. And following that, then I should like to kick off our comments by recognizing Ambassador Banos and Ambassador Jacinto, who's present, and recognize them for their leadership in this very important discussion. We also thank the various representatives of member states whose presence reaffirms their collective commitment to this fundamental topic, strengthening women and women's participation in all areas of defense and security is crucial to guarantee more stable societies, more resilient societies. Experience shows us that performance of women not only refines the response to crisis, but also is a deciding factor to build a long-lasting peace. To move ahead and advance in this topic requires joint efforts, such as this meeting that we're having today. And cooperation becomes a pillar to transform commitment into concrete actions, promoting thus training and exchange of knowledge and strengthening of the role of women in sectors of defense and security. Today, we will have an opportunity to hear about different valuable initiatives by countries who will share their best practices that shows how this role strengthens peace in our area. The board is also committed to this issue and will share what it is doing to promote this agenda for women in peace and security. Thus, the IDB reiterates its commitment to strengthen trust and security in the hemisphere. Let us then have a fruitful meeting and lessons learned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Managing Director. It's always an honor to have you with us. And now I will give the floor, and I also welcome our chair, Ms. Ambassador Henry Martin. You have the floor now.
Good morning, distinguished excellencies, colleagues, members of delegations. I apologize for being tardy. I had another event which I discovered this morning was canceled. And so I'm delighted to join you here. I want to say special thanks to Ambassador Banos for her willingness to step into the chairmanship, certainly the start this morning. I express my profound appreciation to her. We are now I'm following the notes that we have here. We will now hear from the distinguished women who will share some of the best practices implemented by their respective countries to foster women's leadership in public security and national defense. Before we begin the presentations, I welcome words of welcome on behalf of the committee to all of our distinguished guests who are joining us virtually. I want specifically to mention Her Excellency Dr. Faride Raful, Minister of Interior and Police of the Dominican Republic, Ms. Paola Orellana, Director of Human Rights and Peace of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ecuador, Lieutenant Colonel Nurse Maria de Jesus Neri Ferre, Acting Head of the Observatory for Male and Female Equality of the Mexican Army. I extend very sincere thanks on behalf of the committee to all of you for joining us today, for your commitment to peace and security, and for your availability to share your valuable insights on this critical issue. I am being advised that we have additional dignitaries that we must recognize, to whom we are also grateful. La embajadora canadiense para el tema.
The Canadian ambassador for peace and security, Ms. Jacqueline O'Neill. She is Canada's ambassador for women, peace, and security. And also from Ecuador, the director of human rights and peace of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. I think we've already mentioned her name before. We also have Lieutenant Colonel Simon Praíra Cardoso from the Brazilian Air Force. So all of you who have been mentioned, I would like to thank you on behalf of the Committee on Hemispheric Security for being here with us.
Distinguished delegations that, in accordance with our agenda, we will first receive the presentations, followed by an open dialogue on this important topic. It is my absolute delight to extend a warm invitation to take the floor to the distinguished Minister of Interior and Police of the Dominican Republic, Her Excellency Dr. Raful. Excelência, tiene usted la palabra.
Excellency, you have the floor.
Republic.
Thank you, Chair. Greetings. We would like to ask the Chair if we could put off the presentation for the Minister of Interior and Police for the moment, for these to be the second presentation to go in order. They just told me that she is ready, so now she's ready to take the floor. I'm sorry.
Tiene usted la palabra.
Very well. Excellency, you have the floor. Greetings. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you, Minister. Greetings and thank you for this opportunity. I commend the initiative of this meeting, which brings us together on this important role, which is the active participation that we have when it comes to women, peace, and security to ensure greater development of all citizens. We believe that the fundamental goal is to create more opportunities to have more women to get involved in the Dominican Police Department. We have reform that is underway so that we can create these conditions so that we are on the equal level as men. So we are improving the lives and the living conditions of our police officers, and so that more women are attracted and would like to participate in the police force. And how are we doing this? We have made sure that the National Police, we have raised the salaries. We are offering health care and life insurance. And this has been going on for the past 4 years, and we're working with young people and women to work with them. So these reforms are going through education reforms, which is quite advanced. And we also have a mechanism that focuses on human rights, constitutional rights for citizens. We have changed the goal for and the slogan for the Dominican Police, and it is a police department that is come out of this authoritarian mindset, but we have changed that to think more democratically. And we have reforms and this restructuring, which is key within our institutions. So this is a large challenge because we have very good police officers who have been trained and they have gone through different policies. So they have had the chance to work on these policies, to work with citizens. So with this vision and with this transformation, we are able to give these police officers the tools, the tools of constitutional law, etc. We have been able to create the opportunity to graduate more than 1,000 police officers in November. And these are the first police officers that have graduated under this new system that we have been working on in the Dominican Republic. And this has helped us this month to open the doors to more than 1,000 new members who are women, only women, who have decided to become part of our national police force. And they will receive training, and of course, they will be able to take advantage of the technology that we have, and they will have 6 months in the academy and then 6 months patrolling, because it's important for them to patrol to get the experience. So more than 1,000 women have decided to join the police department, and this is key. And as part of this work that the government has been conducting, we have noticed that for 2028, we want to have more than 7,000 women incorporated into the police department. So this is, the interpreter apologizes, the sound is not appropriate for interpretation at this moment. We have 3 high-level ranking women officials. They were promoted just recently for the Independence Day of the Dominican Republic, and we celebrate their rise to their position. And we are also aware that we have major obstacles that we have to continue working on for women, and we're also working on the gender equality policies, which is number 1, and helping women to have these guaranteed rights so they can take advantage of these opportunities, and we can work with them and to see how we can develop their careers. We are also improving the access of supply when it comes to education programs for women to join the police department. So these are the opportunities that we are creating so that women can get involved in positions of leadership and explore their potentials. And we are also quite determined when it comes to fighting against discrimination and gender-based violence and all cultural stereotypes and machismo that have been affecting our area and the National Police Force, particularly when it comes to public safety. That is why we are trying to foster within our institution awareness, citizen awareness. A new police culture is what we are working on to address the challenges and how we resolve conflicts. And we know that women, we are key to make these resolutions much more effective. And also, we are trying to create how opportunities for greater coexistence. And we are also working with the law so that the presence of women in the police force is key so it can dissuade violence in territories. And it is a way that we can dissuade, again, violence and allow this situation to happen sometimes when there are not men involved. Also, to have women police, it's important to have their participation. We are joining other countries in this effort. And we also are working on women leadership within the police department. For about a year, we have been planning within the national police, outside of the reforms, to create safe spaces for these women, bathrooms specifically for women, and rooms specifically for women without having to share those spaces with men. So these types of efforts are showing the opportunities that we are creating to make the national police more welcoming to women. So we are committed to make sure that women have these opportunities so that they can make sure that we have younger people that believe in the Dominican police force and how we treat women. So we are also working on reforms to address disciplinary actions as well, particularly violence against women. So this is a new law, and we are seeking to transform all of the entire police system, and this will be approved in the year 2025 before the National Congress, and it will be presented to society, and we hope that that will happen soon, and the President of the Republic will be able to submit this to the new Congress, the National Congress, in February, so that they can address that matter.
These are the commitments we have, and as I underscored, we have had only 2 women in these positions up until 2024. We had to go through almost a half century so that we could have a minister, a female of the interior, female minister of the interior, and maybe, hopefully, we won't have to wait for another half century. We would like women in politics, but we would also like women in policies and to have a career in politics along public, or in keeping with public policies and in keeping with our ministry. Your Excellency, Farid Raoul, on behalf of the committee, would like to thank you for your very informative presentation and for having honored us with your virtual presence. We are truly grateful to have heard the experiences of your country shared and to have heard also the best practices. Thank you very much, Minister. In English.
Orellana, Director of Human Rights and Peace at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ecuador. Director Orellana will share Ecuador's experience in developing their National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security. Director Orellana, please proceed.
Muchas gracias. Buenos días.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to the Committee on Hemispheric Security, to the head of the IDB, ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors, permanent members, all those present. Since we are talking about the National or Security Council actions of the United Nations in 2025, I'd like to reiterate some words from Ambassador Baños, and I'd just like to add that since the Security Council put different resolutions in which we have described mechanisms for implementation and the context where things will be applied, this allows us to verify that the international agenda for peace and security has moved ahead and incorporates a approach which goes over and above international armed conflicts and also broaches all kinds of crises and internal conflicts. As such, this looks at inclusion. This not only involves traditional issues when it comes to defense, but rather it also covers staff and underscores the leadership of women as mediators in their communities and their political participation. The collective solidarity of women when it comes to crises and the violence that the defenders of human rights have to deal with. These are issues which are very relevant for all countries of the American continent. With this introduction, then, I should like to also tell you that in the last few years, our country, Ecuador, has had an unprecedented increase in levels of insecurity. And this is due to the growing presence of organized crime groups that are linked, for the most part, to drug trafficking. This has generated an increase in crime and conflict. Now, as we all well know, the political impact of organized crime represents one of the biggest risks for democracy and for human rights. Nonetheless, very little is said about the challenge that insecurity represents from the standpoint of gender. And here I'm talking about the increase of gender-based violence, the increase in femicides, an increase in political violence against women, and the latter of which hamstrings the participation and leadership of women in political life of the country. Therefore, of the various measures adopted by President Noboa and his administration, I should like to share with you a good practice. And here I'm talking about building the first plan of action, Women, Peace, and Security, Ecuador 2025 to 2029. And this process took place during the non-permanent membership we had in the Security Council of the United Nations and under the leadership of a woman, our Minister Gabriela Sommerfeld. They were able to conclude that process in December last year. We're talking about a participatory process that was accompanied by women from Ecuador. We had the support of international experts. And in this participatory process, we had 16 different institutions coordinated by the Ministry of the different branches of the state and different entities of the state. We had different areas in human rights, in civil society, on topics such as justice, and also in the area of transparency and social control or management. So we worked with civil society, and they made valuable contributions for putting the plan together. In the overview or the diagnosis, it was determined that it is crucial to have more involvement of women given the emergency situation that the country is dealing with. And furthermore, it is necessary to coordinate the state's work. Whilst there is a lot of different things or different actions that have taken place for the prevention of violence based on gender, we still have to work more on the context of insecurity. And we have to promote empowerment and leadership as a key tool to break with the cycles of violence and poverty that disproportionately affect women and girls. I would like to tell you that a typological analysis of the conflict was carried out, which was carried out by the United Nations Office Against Drugs and Crime and by UN Women between 2023 and 2024. This was done in the provinces of Guayaquil, Macaya, Esmeralda, Malta, Laguario, and Ibarra. And in addition to that, consultations were carried out with community leaderships to identify the issues and to zoom in on the issues that the plan should prioritize. For the logical framework, the expected impact with implementation of the plan was looked at. The objectives, the outputs, and activities were also looked at, and there we established indicators and goals to have a monitoring and evaluation system that would be implemented. The plan has three objectives. We have a summary of the plan, which is printed, and here it goes into the granular details of the objectives and all of the actions that we're going to carry out over the next 4 years, and which we can share with you happily, just so that we are in keeping with the topic of this meeting. I'm just going to refer to Objective 2, and this is generation of spaces, getting together spaces so that more Afro-descendant women, girl children, and their organizations can lift up their voice and their leadership in processes to build and maintain peace. The plan recognizes that women contribute very valuable opinions or different views around the negotiation table when it comes to defense and security. And this means empowering their own capacities and opening up more spaces for their leadership. With regards to participation of women in the Ministry of National Defense, UN Women supported us with an evaluation of gender participation in 2023, and the results were presented in March 2024 and underscored that there was an increase by 2% the percentage of women in the armed forces, which went from 2.6 in 2013 to 4.7 in 2023. And similarly, in absolute terms, there's been an increase from 2020 to 2023, 867 in 2023, and women have slowly joined forces which were exclusively devoted to men before. Well, thus far, there's not an equal presence in the peace missions of women and men, and therefore, to motivate and to promote decision-taking positions and issues that are related to peace and security, and to empower and promote participation of women in peace operations and humanitarian aid, the plan looks at implementation of a training program which is geared towards women in the military to build capacity so that they can manage operations and learn foreign languages as they lead. In the area of justice, the actions of the plan are geared towards strengthening capacities of community leaders by giving them the tools that they need so that they can use mechanisms and alternatives for solving disputes. This is already in the law, but there has to be a methodological training, practical part with popular or community organized education so that we can strengthen communication and raise awareness as to the use of these mechanisms, which are specifically geared towards being used in rural areas. We envisage working to strengthen participation in the country in women who are in mediation. And this initiative aims to promote the resolution of regional and global disputes, considering active participation of women as agents for peace building. Before my time is up, I'd just like to conclude my comments by saying and sharing with you that for implementation of the first Ecuadorian plan, we need to have the international community accompany us. They have to be on our side, and all of the committees of all multilateral and regional organizations, technical assistance and financing for projects and programs will spur us on to continue working so that we can promote better opportunities for women and girls. Thank you very much.
I'm delighted as chair to record our appreciation to you, Director Aureliana. Thank you very much for your informative presentation. Lieutenant Colonel Nurse Maria de Jesus Neri Ferre, acting head of the Observatory for Male and Female Equality of the Mexican Army, will make her presentation to us and offer insights from her country's perspective. I'm delighted to offer the floor to you, Lieutenant Colonel Maria de Jesus Neri Ferre. Please proceed.
Microphone, please, for the speaker.
Me dicen por favor si la ven.
La escuchamos.
Hola, ¿sí la ven?
Yes, we have your presentation on the screen, and I think that you can go ahead. Yes, I'll run the presentation myself. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank everybody for the invitation and for the opportunity to show you everything that the Secretary of National Defense is doing as part of the Mexican Army and the Air Force is involved in. But before continuing with the strategies to ensure participation of women in operative activities in the armed forces for defense, I would like to refer and speak to our experience when it comes to Resolution 1325 and the first national plan that Mexico has had and that we used on this issue in 2021 under the leadership of the Secretary of Foreign Affairs and the National Institute of Women and the current Secretary for Women. We had the participation of the National Defense, of the Secretary of the Navy, and Citizen Safety Division. We saw the potential of women when it comes to maintaining peace. And this year, we would like to distribute the report for our National Action Plan and the kind of work that we have for this year. I will share with you the second Mexican plan. And in addition to this plan, as the backdrop presented in 2021, since 2019, Mexico took on these commitments in the Organization of American States. We also would like to say that we had two commitments to have greater participation of women as officials, observers, and military people in peacekeeping operations underscoring the standards of the state. And this is a commitment to carry out actions to strengthen the capacity and deployment of women in various actions. And as part of the backdrop, then these two proposals, these two pillars were crucial to kick off the National Action Plan, thus strengthening substantive participation of women, having their participation in prevention of conflicts at all levels and within the United Nations for construction and consolidation of peace. Along the same line, to strengthen and raise awareness for these activities was also part of the program. Now, looking at some of the thematic areas for lines of action, the Secretary of National Defense is supported by various internal organizations, such as the General Directorate of Human Rights, Social Communication Directorate, the General Directorate, to strengthen these issues and the respective lines of action and activities that concern capacity building when it comes to training and help. And of course, the intervention of our armed forces for women that are involved in peace missions. But of course, whilst we have the National Action Plan that was issued in 2021, I should also like to mention that since 2018, we got a joint training center for peace operations up and running in Mexico. This is Secopan. This was done with a view to training the Army, the people, the Air Force members, and for those who also participated in the first report of the first National Action Plan, such as the Navy of Mexico and the Secretary of Security and Civilian Protection when it comes to also the police. This joint center is strategic and it has installations and space enough to carry out capacity building and simulation exercises for a peace mission. And it also carries out training to joint missions and staff of the different dependencies of the Mexican state. And of course, taking into account the training standards that are established by the United Nations. As far as concerns training, we've got the competencies to train personnel, the officials of the military and those military that are part of the United Nations, including people who are military observers and other officials. There is training for the United Nations Police. There's a course for gender assistance and certification for police. In 2023 and in the first quarter of 2024, we trained many women. This is one of our greatest strengths for all of the actions that involve uniformed women who participate in peacekeeping missions. On the other hand, participation of Mexico in peace operations began in 2015, and since then there has been the participation of 27 women in the various missions, officials for training, as heads of logistics, staff, and strong points for gender, people that link up with civilians. We have representatives of 3 women for the moment, and for 2025, we hope to have 2 more. Moving on and continuing with the issue that I'm really talking about, well, what are the strategies that we've carried out to ensure inclusion of women in operative activities in armed forces? And it's important to mention in that light that the Secretary of National Defense, as we see, has a long history to strengthen the participation and permanence in this area. And they carry out training activities on an ongoing basis. And this is done permanently, so as to train not only the people to deploy, but other people who are part of the armed forces and the Air Force, so as to raise awareness of this population. Of the support agencies, we have the DG of Human Rights, a training center in human rights, international humanitarian law, and gender equality. All of this is done periodically via training online and in person through agreements and defenders of human rights in the areas that I already mentioned. Of course, I also wanted to tell you about the evolution of women's participation in our Air Force and in our Army. for more than 80 to 90 years. And officially, we have background as to the participation of women since 1934, and in the military professional area since 1938, having set up the military school for nurses. This has been around for more than 80 years, and this allows for the participation of men as well. Now, in the 70s, we had women involved in the medical areas. In the case of the military medical school, we have done things since 1917 or thereabouts. In 2007, a plan that goes above what we've done. We had a military college, and there are more than 2 years of history there. It's a space which had been strictly for men since its creation, but now it has opened up for women for the military school and the engineering military school, of course. And this year was a big step in 2012. I would also like to underscore some very important things that were done, because when women come in on the artillery side, this is a good part of their education. And in 2017, women, for the very first time, were part of disarmament missions. And in 2021, this is unprecedented, or was unprecedented in our history, because for the very first time, women participated in the training forces of the infantry and arms divisions. And they concluded their studies in 2024. And they are part of the officials who are going to lead these units of arms and services. In the Army and the Air Force, we have 2 points: military service, where all women who are going to have a career in the different military arenas are prepared so that they can work in the military. This is a 6-month program where they have training and everything so that they can strengthen their professional value. In addition to the 6 months training, they afterwards go back to their divisions in the military. But it's important to underscore that in 2021, as I was saying, this opened up careers, and this was the first phase. And I think that this is a very important strategy that we have developed in the last few years. In this first phase, we have trained officials in the military college, and at the same time, in 2022, 2023, there was a campaign to recruit women who were part of the Army so as to have them participate in the military school. As sergeants and so on, they could be part of the group of officials. And then in a third phase, we had the recruitment of women to work in the infantry cavalry units. And strategically speaking, we did recruitment in areas in which these women could have access to health services or have GYNOB assistance as needed. Housing was built that considered a hall for women, and a good practice that was done. This is prior to the recruitment. We trained staff for recruitment cells and the leaders of these sections, and also had certain supplies for these units which would cater to women commanders and all of the members of the units. And this really strengthened things because in this way we also strengthened all of the approaches to violence so that women could be part of it and so that we could develop them and strengthen their professional development.
Currently, the total amount of women is about 18,311. This represents 9.4% in relation to men and women in the Mexican Air Force and Army. That is 195,550. Currently, we have a force of 1,913 women, particularly in the Air Force and the Army, and also we have a professional path toward chief, and we're talking about 162 officials. So we will have a chief of the Mexican Air Force soon. So with this opening in different areas, women are able to achieve these positions, these leadership positions, and by 2034, we may have women as generals and brigadiers, even. And by 2037, we may have women in positions such as general and brigadier again, and they may be accessing the position of the Secretary of Defense. So the opportunities are open, and these women are able to participate in these opportunities to achieve these high-ranking positions. Currently, the highest rank that a woman has currently is the general of the brigada or the brigade. And this is key when it comes to the amount of women who are currently in these high-ranking positions of the Mexican Air Force. And in conclusion, I would like to say that in Mexico, our armed forces and the Army and the Air Force, women are participating in all of the departments and specialties, and their military training allows them to have the professional capacities to participate in all of the high-ranking positions and the decision-making positions. They will continue exercising their leadership on. Thank you very much for your time. Lieutenant Colonel Nurse Maria de Jesus Neri Ferri, thank you so much for joining us virtually this morning, and we value your presentation, and we have taken note of the best practices from your presentation. So we would like to congratulate Mexico as well on its advancements in this area.
I extend a warm
In English.
to Colonel Simone Praia Cardoso of the Brazilian Air Force to take the floor and to share with us her country's perspectives.
Bom dia a todos os presentes. Todos me ouvem?
Le escuchamos.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Good morning. I would like to get my presentation up and running. Thank you very much. I'd like to greet everybody at the top table, all of the guests and everybody who's here with us. I would like to say how happy I am to be able to tell you what the Brazilian Armed Forces is doing to promote integration, or gender integration, I should say, in the armed forces in general. Initially, we'll be talking about women, peace, and security. Next slide, please. My presentation is going to look at this very brief agenda with an introduction talking about feminine or participation, development, training will also be included for inclusion of women, best practices or good practices, voluntary feminine or women's enlisting. This is an initiative of our government, and it is done with a view to increase women. I would like to also talk about the prevention manual, some of the practices that have to do with sexual abuses and sexual exploitation and abuse. And then I will conclude with some brief conclusions. Next slide, please. Here in the grid, we can see the total number of women in Brazil who are in the military with updated information as of the 31st of December 2024. Up until that point, we had 359 women for peace missions. This would be 2012 to onwards. We had other numbers which were part of the Haiti mission, and in the last 3 years, we have upheld an average of 16 Brazilian military people that have participated in peace missions. And I'm talking about United Nations peace missions. Next slide, please. Here we have the updated data as well from United Nations peacekeeping page, which have to do with the levels hit by different countries and the participation of women. And here, let me just point out that Brazil had 23% on an average of 21% for 2024. So we went over what was established. Now, the participation of women, particularly in staff officer functions, these are very relevant functions, decision-taking, and assistance posts, and active participation in planning. And let me just point out, I'd like to underscore that I am a member of the Brazilian Air Force, and I began in 1997, and I was a pioneer as far as official women in this kind of post. I opened up the possibility in 1996, so I'm from the first set, and thereafter in 2003, access was also opened up for aviation, and then both the Brazilian Navy as well as the Brazilian Army both started to accept women in their schools, academies, so that there would be official training. And so currently, we have in all of the forces that promote participation and membership of women in the military with a view to training and increasing the number of female participants, particularly in the functions that involve taking decisions. Next slide, please. Here, we don't want to overlook the OAS's targets for. We had 25% of women, presence of women we had in peacekeeping missions here, in the targets for uniformed women in peace operations, particularly in the staff. And Brazil has a participation of 23%. 23%. So in 2025, 3 years it took to get to this target, or what has been established, I should say, for 2028. We are in a position to assign military people for these missions within the framework of the numbers established, or the targets, I should say, established by the United Nations. Here, let me point out some of the various actions that the armed forces have done to promote this kind of membership, and not just for us to have female presentation in the missions and quantitatively, but also in terms of action, so that the Brazilian armed forces have done a lot in the last few years when it comes to training women who are assigned to these missions. We have a report here that talks about the sign-ups for women who would like to do the operations course, or I should say the peace operations course. Here, the highlight is for the armed forces that prepare women for UN peace missions. Next. He would have an agreement that was signed in 2024, Itamaraty and the Brazilian Navy, to have women included in peace operations, thus ratifying the commitment with the UN's agenda, the agenda for women and security. Next. Here, let me just point out, it's very important to have had this international recognition. Our military, the Brazilian Army, Mr. Renata, let me just highlight that in May and June in 2023, during a wave of violence, we wanted to point out the participation for a evacuation and rescue operation of 70 children and 30 vulnerable women. Now, the training has prepared Brazilian armed forces to prepare these women very well so that they could participate. And Colonel Renata was indicated for a UN award in the category of gender equality. And I also wanted to point out that this kind of opportunity to be able to act as an advisor in MINUSCO in 2022, 2023, we had people who were able to participate in this mission. This was really very relevant, and right now we have a latent conflict in the armed forces that are acting in Goma, and I had the opportunity to participate as an advisor in that mission. I can tell you it's really tough work, and women's representation for these kinds of missions is crucial. Next slide, please. Here we had an event, a land event of the Brazilian Army and the peace mission. And I can underscore the commitment to ongoing training of women to participate in the missions. Next slide, please. Here we have a specific preparatory course which is carried out for female military personnel for peace missions. We've got cooperation for peace missions, and in 2022, we had the participation of 23 women. We prepared 23 women, and in 2023, 17 women, and every year we keep the preparation going. We do this on an ongoing basis with new techniques and underscoring over and above everything else the WPS approach. Next, here also, this is more training. This is piloting training for engagement. Next, we also have training for the quick reaction force. This is for the engagement team. And this is training where we have an opportunity to verify the real challenges out there and to conclude that the best measures have to be adopted so that when deployment of these women in the missions take place, they can have an experience in terms of how to act, bearing in mind the training that has been offered. Next, more recently, let me just highlight and point out for you that the Ministry of Defense recorded 22,000 signups, and in 2025, this year, we had the record of what we see on the slide, 22 signups, and enlistment will continue up until the 30th of June 2025. So we have realized how important this opportunity opened up for women is to be part of the armed forces. And this participation is such that 22,000 women signed up for 1,465 openings that were available. Next, the Ministry of Defense intends to gradually increase the number of women that are recruited for initial military service, hitting 20% of the openings. And let me just point out that right now, the Brazilian Armed Forces has 37,000 women, which is about 10% of the force. So gradually, women in the armed forces will increase. Next, let me also just point out that the budget, which is a very deep area of concern where the armed forces have acted, and this is a budget that we had for 2024 for the manual for prevention and some of the practices when it comes to sexual abuse. So we had all of the versions in both English and Portuguese, and this is a handbook on prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse so that we can prevent these practices in combat times. Next, here let me just point out that we have a national plan of policies for women, and in the previous actions, this is in keeping with our, once again, national plan of policies for women. Next, just to conclude, there has been an increase in female participation in UN peace missions. The capacity for Brazilian armed forces, as well as sustainability of women's participation, has not only been quantitatively a point that we looked at within the UN parameters, but also qualitatively we looked at this and we had continuous training in keeping with the agenda for women and peace in the United Nations, and then our preventative actions against sexual abuse and exploitation were looked at as well. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada, Coronel Simone Praia Cardoso.
Thank you very much, Ms. Simone Pereira Cardoso. In English now.
Country's best practices in advancing the inclusion of women in leadership positions in the sphere of peace and security, efforts which we applaud and for which we congratulate Brazil. I now offer the floor to the distinguished Ambassador O'Neill of Canada, who will speak on the topic of women, peace, and security. And we look forward to perspectives and best practices from the experience of this member state. Ambassador O'Neill, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Thank you very much, Chair, Excellencies, participants who are here, as well as our Canadian delegation. My colleague taught me a very useful phrase, and that phrase was all protocols observed, and now I'm going to continue in English.
To be able to join this discussion, it's such a joy to see countries coming together to exchange experiences and insights. It's been over 5 years since Canada has created this position of Ambassador for Women, Peace and Security. And I'm able to work directly with Canadian Armed Forces, our defense communities, security communities, and various other ministries. And prior to that, spent about 15 years working on women, peace, and security globally. And am constantly struck by how much every country has still to learn and how much every country has to share. So I'm really especially delighted that you've created this forum for doing just that. So in that spirit of the journey that we are on together, I want to share 3 reflections from Canada. First is that even though this field is much more familiar to many more people now, it's always important to clarify what we mean when we talk about women, peace, and security. So describing what it is and what it is not. We're still seeing that even all of these years in, there are many misperceptions existing across our societies when we reference this work. So it's important that we are clarifying that we are not saying that women are inherently more peaceful than men. We're not saying that this is about hard power versus soft power, because we know that both men and women can deliver both. We're importantly clarifying that this is not only about force composition or the number of women in forces. It's not only about sexual harassment or misconduct. And it's not for women, meaning for their protection only. What it is about ultimately is increasing operational effectiveness. It's the idea that diverse groups make better decisions, that women from various backgrounds and identities not only have a right to participate, but that when we do, the outcomes are better. It's about making sure that everyone is able to serve how they are best suited, with no artificial restrictions on biases and stereotypes, but instead based on actual proven and tested capabilities. It's about reducing our blind spots in situational awareness and having more comprehensive picture of local populations' needs and interests, understanding migration patterns and behaviors of combatants and non-combatants, triggers for violence, so much more. So we're seeing how it's still important to be very clear about what women, peace, and security means and why it's part of our focus. A second reflection from Canada is that there is no security issue to which a women, peace, and security lens is not relevant. And not using this lens and understanding these gendered dimensions means having blind spots. So our previous speakers each spoke to the broad relevance of this work, including on non-traditional security issues. So take artificial intelligence, for example, where algorithms amplify gender and racial biases through machine learning cycles. Those can be transferred even inadvertently to military artificial intelligence systems. An example that brings this very much to life is that many militaries are now looking at fighter jets having voice automated commands from pilots in their cockpit. And in some versions of voice automated command systems, the rate of error for understanding the commands of male voices is about 2 to 3%. For female voices, the error rates can be around 30%. So imagine a fighter jet getting 30% of the pilot's instructions wrong. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. It relates very much to a challenge and an issue that many of us are dealing with right now related to climate. Climate emergencies are a major driver of migration, and the majority of migrants in these mass migration contexts are women. There are implications related to the recruitment by armed groups or gangs or criminal networks, trafficking, exploitation, sexual and gender-based violence, and much more. And perhaps like many of you, the Canadian Armed Forces are increasingly being deployed to address climate emergencies like forest fires and floods, including within our own borders. And we are understanding that we need to know better what messages and instructions will reach entire communities, what different movement patterns and physical security needs they have during evacuations, and so much more. So from humanitarian assistance and disaster recovery to disinformation, foreign interference, mine action, terrorism, and so much more, there is not an issue that does not benefit from the analysis from a women, peace, and security perspective. And our final reflection for today, what we have learned and continue to experience, is that we must be intentional. Progress on this issue is not linear and it doesn't happen automatically. We must be intentional. And so that means being systematic in our analysis and in all of our work. In part, that means not assuming that every woman we work with or who is within the forces sort of knows how to do women, peace, and security, or making an assumption that being a woman makes someone best qualified to lead on some of this work. And on the contrary, what we've learned over many years is that we need male allies, male champions, advocates. It's so essential to see senior men addressing this work as a core issue relevant to the forces that they may be leading. National action plans and strategies, of course, are another way to be sure that we are being intentional. So taking the jargon and the rhetoric of this work and bringing it to the fully operational and tactical level, as our colleagues have just described, through, in our case, we have a national action plan. We just released our third plan. While we were drafting it, we studied many of your countries and delegations' plans, and I dare say copied already many of your good practices. In our case, our national action plan has an overarching or umbrella strategy, and then departments and agencies have their own implementation plans, including the Canadian Armed Forces and National Defence, a Royal Canadian Mounted Police, public safety, and others. And we have some customized elements that relate specifically to them and that have evolved and changed over time. So for example, our Ministry of National Defence and Armed Forces plan describes having more systematic and intentional engagement with women in civil society, women's rights leaders, activists, and others to inform our strategic and tactical level planning. More integration in defense intelligence, particularly because the knowledge generated is so critical to the planning and conduct of operations. And addressing our internal culture, which our National Action Plan now does for the first time, which so many of the speakers prior to me just referenced. Part of that involves building capacity of men and women across the armed forces to serve as gender advisors. So we just hosted our very first gender advisor training course here in Canada. Still, there are many areas where we continue to struggle. Many colleagues just referenced recruitment. And we know that many countries are facing major challenges, including Canada, where we have what we've termed in some instances a recruitment crisis. We have about 16% women across the forces, a figure that has been stagnant over almost 10 years. And we're struggling to recruit young men and women from across the country. So we share many ongoing challenges. And as we talked about, part of being deliberate and thoughtful is learning from each other on these issues of recruitment, retention, promotion, deployment, operations, and so much more. Again, there's still so much for us to learn, so much to share, And it's just crucial that we work together, particularly as there are more and more forces in the world who are threatened by the capabilities that all of this work represents and don't want us to be more effective militarily as governments and as partners. So again, merci beaucoup, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Ambassador O'Neill, the scope of the presentation you have just made will form an important part of the wide-ranging perspectives shared this morning, a trove of best practices to which this committee can refer going forward. The committee extends its sincere appreciation to you. The upcoming item on our agenda is the presentation by Lieutenant Colonel Rufio Manzano, who will discuss the actions undertaken by the Inter-American Defense Board to implement the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in the Hemisphere. Lieutenant Colonel, I invite you to proceed.
Gracias.
Thank you. Greetings. Could we please put my presentation on the screen, please? Thank you very much. Lieutenant Colonel Rocio Manzano, I'm at your service. So today we will talk about the action to implement the agenda Women, Peace and Security in our hemisphere. And I will start by highlighting that there it is. I would like to highlight by saying that the UN and the OAS have adopted a series of commitments and resolutions that align with the Women, Peace and Security agenda. In this regard, the IADB, as one of the organizations of the OAS, will provide technical, advisory, and educational information on defense in the hemisphere. And in order to fulfill our commitment to women, peace, and security, we have implemented a Women, Peace, and Security education program, which has three main pillars. The first pillar is the pillar of information. Let us see if we can see the three pillars. The first pillar is information. This has to do with lessons learned from the member states. This will help us to come up with policies and to look at the reality of each country. That is why it's key that we train and update and disseminate new information when it comes to women, peace, and security that will allow us to provide feedback and strategies. The main goal of the program is to foster the incorporation of women in different levels of defense and security, and that is why the IADB has established points of contacts with experts when it comes to Resolution 1325, facilitating research when it comes to women, peace, and security, and participating actively in workshops to come up with inclusive strategies, and that we can look at the different entities such as the Perry Center, and we can provide conferences and seminars where we can invite people to participate. Last year we were in Peru and in the Dominican Republic. Another way we can provide assistance is working with the IDB, and there we have seen a positive development in our information and the work that we've been doing and the number of people that have signed up for these workshops. In 2022, we had 1,648 people from 25 countries. In 2023, more than 2,000 people signed up from 32 countries. In 2024, 13,000 people signed up from 67 countries. So this was done thanks to the fact that we created a network of friends that has four columns. The first is the international organizations, the UN, the International Red Cross, the RESDAL, and the OAS, through the Committee of Hemispheric Security and the Inter-American Committee on Women. And this keeps us in full contact with experts on this matter. The second acts are the education centers, such as the Georgetown University, the International University of Florida, and the very Inter-American Defense College, which currently at this very moment is developing a course on gender, and this will keep us up to date on concepts on women, peace, and security. And the third axe is the armed forces of the member states. And thanks to our network, we have been able to work with the Inter-American Defense agencies in our region. So with observer countries and member states, we have been able to work on ways to collaborate when it comes to the matter of women, peace, and security. Also, part of this network, we have different regional and sub-regional organizations, and thanks to the reciprocal cooperation, we have a field of action. It's important to highlight that in the seminars, we are intimately linked with what the Inter-American Defense Board has to do and the challenges that they have when it comes to women, peace, and security. That's why this year we are going to address the matter of strategies to include women in operational activities in the armed forces. This will be conducted on 19 March 2025. We're not just looking to foster the incorporation of women in different organic structures of the armed forces, but to promote the participation of women in peacekeeping operations, not just as observers nor just as part of the staff, but as a key active element in the processes of decision making and at the levels of planning. In conclusion, or in summary, we can see that we have a clear link between the IADB, the international organizations, the think tanks, and the armed forces. And through these organizations, we can continue fostering the involvement of women in different levels of security and defense. We can continue strengthening the network of friendly allies, which will back our presence in the region. We can continue exchanging information among the member states, because with that information, we can come up with strategies that are ideal, and they will meet the true needs of our countries. With this work, the IADB is backing its commitment to the challenges in the women, peace, and security agenda in our region. And we will always act to back up our slogan, fostering and strengthening trust and hemispheric security. Thank you so much.
Lieutenant Colonel, the committee records its appreciation to you for your presence here today and for your edifying presentation on the work undertaken by the Inter-American Defense Board towards implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. Gracias. Thank you so much. Colleagues, Excellencies, delegations, having been informed and inspired by these insightful presentations, delegations are now invited to take the floor to comment on the matter under consideration. The floor is open. Mexico is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For Mexico, it's an honor to participate in this joint session of the Committee on Hemispheric Security and the IADB. This reflects the will of the member states to address a key matter for development and stability of our societies, and the recognition of the relevance that women have in peace building and safety, and the actions that we must take to foster their full and equal participation in these actions. This session is key because the leadership of the Committee on Hemispheric Security is led by women. Historically, women have been fundamental pillars of our communities, not just the spine, but as economic and educational and judicial leaders. However, recognizing their role in women, peace, and security has been long coming, and it's still not enough. Mexico is going through a historic moment. We are governed for the first time by a woman president, Ms. Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo. But she did not get to that high position alone. She came with all women. This is a historic milestone in gender equality, but it symbolizes the advancement of women in politics and when it comes to decision-making spheres that was recently overwhelmingly controlled by men. So this matter must be celebrated and applauded and should be a lesson to push women at all levels, namely in the securities field and law enforcement and diplomacy and the matters that bring us together today. We still have a great deal to do. Security is not just a matter of force and power. It also has to do with prevention, negotiation, and peace building. These are areas where women, we have also demonstrated that we are highly effective. So Resolution 1325 of the UN Security Council marked a watershed moment to officially recognize the impact of armed conflict and the role of women in this phenomenon and their participation in preventing and resolving conflicts. Since then, additional resolutions have been adopted that strengthen this agenda and broaden its scope, and it highlights the role of women to participate in all areas of peace and security and the need to protect women and children in conflict and the commitment of the states to promote plans of national action to implement policies with a gender focus. Mexico has been a firm defender of these principles. In 2021, we presented our first national action plan for follow-up of this Resolution 1325. With a cross-cutting approach, we seek to eliminate barriers, structural barriers, and to promote inclusion of women at all levels of security. Also, my country has actively worked with the implementation of these commitments through concrete actions, and we are highlighting greater presence of women in peacekeeping operations and through the mediation network that we have for women, and we are focusing on gender and security apparatuses. Also, Mexico has performed a key role with the UN, promoting the inclusion of the gender aspect in global strategies when it comes to conflict prevention, and we are fighting against violent extremism and post-conflict reconstruction. On a national level, we have moved forward and we have made great advancements, and the majority of the country's representation of women in the armed forces and in the security cabinets and in peace negotiations is still quite low. So despite the existence of action plans, the gap between implementation continues to be an obstacle. Many times women continue to be excluded in spaces of decision making, and when it comes to gender-based violence and sexual violence against women is often used as a tool of oppression and in armed conflicts as well as in crises. That is why we need more women leading at all levels, more women taking decisions in security cabinets, more women leading when it comes to prevention and fighting against violence, and more women participating at the negotiation table, more women on UN peacekeeping missions as well. Dear colleagues, history has shown that women, we can be peace builders and protect our communities and defend tirelessly security. Women have full abilities to participate in negotiations and peacekeeping processes to come up with lasting solutions, and we can come up with solid solutions and effective policies. When women have the decision-making power, societies are more equitable and more resilient. Mexico reaffirms its commitment to the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, and we will continue to promote policies that ensure the full and equal and significant participation of women at all levels of decision making, because security is not just built with weapons and military strategies. Security is built with justice, with prevention, and with inclusion, and particularly with the participation of women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'm pleased to offer the floor to Costa Rica.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Permanent representatives, executive secretaries, good morning, everybody. I would like to address you on this agenda for women, peace and security. We would like to express our recognition of the General Secretariat to the Inter-American Defense Board and you, the head of the Committee on Hemispheric Security, for continuing to promote and include this item on the agenda. We also are grateful to member states that promote this very valuable topic and the presentations that we have heard at today's meeting. Madam Chairman, we agree with the fact that almost a quarter of a century, Resolution 1325 in the Security Council was passed and marked a time before we looked at a gender approach to peace and security. The resolution recognizes the fundamental role of women in the prevention of conflicts, in building peace, and in the decision-making processes when it comes to security. Costa Rica, as a nation without any army since 1948, has built its stability based on a model undergirded by education and democratic institutions and the respect for human rights. It allows us to reaffirm our conviction that security and peace doesn't exclusively depend on military force or might, but rather on inclusive societies where women play a crucial role in decision-making. With regard to Costa Rica's commitment to this very relevant resolution, we can highlight that our work is not just a question of principles, but rather we historically have also carried out concrete actions. Since 1994, we have had some public policies and standards for the prevention of domestic violence in families and gender-based violence. And under the leadership of our ministry and in close coordination with institutions such as the Ministry of Women's Affairs and the Ministry of Public Safety, the Ministry of Justice and Peace, and the National Institute for Women, SEDINAM, this is one of the entities that is involved in this process since December 2022. We began a process to put together a first national plan, the PAM, to implement Resolution 1325. We would like to conclude this participatory process, and we intend to do so this year, 2025. So along that line, then, we have moved ahead with the implementation of a women's agenda for peace and security on different levels. When it comes to externally, we have active participation in the various solutions and all of the measures that have to do for peace and security when it takes place in multilateral arenas. National security, here we have an integration of women agenda, including the fight against drug trafficking and the prevention of conflicts. When it comes to a peace culture, we promote education in gender equality and the participation of women to build sustainable peace. In migration policies, we've incorporated the gender perspective to protect women in context of human mobility. As has been mentioned, in coordination with the Committee on Migratory Affairs, chaired by Costa Rica, with the support of states, we have also had this approach when it comes to the work plan that we adopted. Now, with regards to the challenges and the future commitments, we know that there are still a lot of challenges, serious challenges that we have to broach as a region together. The presentation of women in sectors of security and justice has a lot of obstacles, and that's why, as member states, we have to strengthen mechanisms that promote this participation with a view to equitable recruitment and with affirmative actions that ensure that more women are part and parcel of these spaces. As such, we reiterate the urgency of approaching gender violence in context of conflict, guaranteeing protection of women, girls, and promotion of processes that are much more inclusive with these kinds of challenges and the evidence that we have seen. From the ministry standpoint, we absolutely are sure that everything applies to cyberspace, and we feel that cyber diplomacy with a gender-based approach is a fundamental instrument to mitigate these ills and to promote cooperation amongst nations, facilitate crafting standards and international coordination and cooperation amongst governments and private sectors to strengthen resilience when it comes to cyber threats that are constantly cropping up and evolving. So with this spirit, then, I should like to share with you that we are working with a diplomatic team, an interdisciplinary, intersectoral team within the ministry that is aligned to this foreign policy. And our PAM that we envisage launching this year with a national strategy for cybersecurity. This stipulates that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Culture should promote international relations with a view to building a cyber secure space. Also, let me just say that along this line, the declaration that was adopted recently in November with the support of more than 26 member states of this organization, promoted by Costa Rica, was with a view to declaring the OAS a safe space for all women. With this very important declaration, then we once again reaffirm our commitment for zero tolerance against violence for all women in all negotiation spaces on the level of the Secretariat, and of course, in terms of all of the committees and the councils of this organization. We truly appreciate that SIM is working to work on this and to see the effective implementation of this declaration. My country, just to conclude, will hold the first hemispheric forum for peace, women, peace and security, because this will be held on the 26th to the 28th of March in Costa Rica, and it's organized by the Women's Network for Studies of Hemispheric Studies, William Perry, right here in Washington, D.C. It's part of this committee and it's a strategic ally for all Costa Ricans when it comes to training professionals dedicated to promoting security and peace in the Americas. We will also have the participation of women who are experts in different areas, such as climate change, natural disasters, mitigation of disasters, irregular migration, and organized crime. Madam Chairman, once again, reaffirm Costa Rica's commitment, I should say. We continue to promote policies that guarantee the full-fledged, effective participation of all women when it comes to all areas in society, particularly those areas that have to do with security, because there's no long-lasting security without gender equality, nor sustainable peace without the participation of all women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. The floor is open to the delegation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Security Council's Women, Peace and Security Agenda. But despite international efforts for over 2 decades to integrate women in matters of peace and security, there is still a lack of participation as measures to remove women from the periphery of the peace and security process are still low. Therefore, there is still so much to be done, starting with political commitment. The inclusion of women in national defense and public security decision-making positions at senior levels of government yields diverse perspectives on addressing national security challenges, creating a more effective and strategic response. With that in mind, my delegation applauds the IADB for its commitment to implementing this agenda across the Americas. Through its seminars and conferences, it has positioned itself as a key advocate to advance the integration of women and their contributions to the peace process. My delegation looks forward to this year's activities, as outlined by Lieutenant Colonel Rocio, on the steps the IADB will take to further empower women to be catalysts for peace and security. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'm pleased to offer the floor to the delegation of Guatemala.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. My delegation would like to thank the chair for convening this joint meeting between the Committee on Hemispheric Security and the American Defense Board to broach this topic of empowering women as catalysts for sustainable peace and inclusive security, best practices across the Americas. We would like to also thank the presenters from the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Brazil, Mexico, and Canada and the Inter-American Defense Board for their presentations on best practices to promote leadership of women in public security and national defense, as well as all of the actions taken by the IADB in the agenda women, peace, and security in the hemisphere. Guatemala feels that it is relevant to underscore that for almost 25 years since the Resolution 1325 from the Security Council United was approved on women, peace, and security, there's still a lot of ground to cover to abide by the provisions of this and other resolutions that are similar. Regional conflicts and those around the world continue to break the efforts that have been made so that women can have very important roles to play in our society. Of all of the actions that Guatemala has done within the framework of this resolution, let me just highlight that we are the 8th country in Latin America and the 2nd Central American country to establish a national plan of action, Plan 2025. This was approved in 2017. This will be done via the institutional top table on women, peace, and security. This is inspired in 2023 in April, and it looks at the interinstitutional coordination to craft public policies for plans, programs, and projects that have to do with the implementation of the resolution, in which different state institutions participate, as accompanied also by civil society. Another relevant sector for Guatemala when it comes to this issue is the need to increase feminine staff that participate in peacekeeping missions of the UN, as some speakers have already mentioned. To date, my country has deployed more than 372 women in these kinds of missions. At the beginning of this month, Guatemala deployed a contingent of military police in Haiti, and this is made up of 150 officials. 16 are women, including a lieutenant, and this is in keeping with the gender parity strategy of the UN. It is recognized that participation of women is crucial to have long-lasting peace. Women have shown that they are change agents, and they should have the opportunity to be able to work even more towards that objective. As such, then, in April 2024, the policy of military women in the Guatemalan Army was launched. This takes into account attention to women and takes as its basis 6 different strategic pillars, including topics such as education, professional development, leadership, protection against cases of sexual violence, and other points that have to do with their fundamental rights, in addition to including a specific pillar on women, peace, and security. These are just some examples of some of the big results of the national activities that have taken to incorporate women and, with their creative inclusion of their thoughts and work, contribute to strengthening the women's agenda in peace and security. And in the final analysis, to make strides in this area, we need to have a cross-cutting view of the issues, but also opportunities and solutions. Inclusion and participation of women is crucial to develop in any country, and therefore for peace and for world stability. And that is why we truly appreciate the work done by the Committee on Hemispheric Security, the Inter-American Defense Board, and the Inter-American Commission of Women for all of the opportunity to generate an exchange of experiences and all of the training that zooms in on strengthening capacities of women in the region as part of complying with the commitments that we have abided by and to be in keeping with the agenda women, peace, and security. Lastly, Guatemala hopes to continue to invest in women's empowerment. This directly contributes to gender equality, a quashing of poverty, economic growth and inclusive growth, sustainable development, and therefore peace and stability in our societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Guatemala. The floor is open to the delegation of Colombia.
Gracias, señora Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. My delegation values the fact that we are discussing this matter, particularly the best practices shared by the presenters. So I would like to refer to the process started by President Gustavo Petro, which is a national plan, women, peace, and security, 20 years after Resolution 1325 was passed. The goal is to respond to the historic debt that women in each one of our territories in our domestic conflict have been cultivating peace in Colombia. For more than a year, we have had the participation of more than 1,500 women and representatives from different territories in Colombia, and they have been focusing on strategies to transform the lives of women and to respond to the challenges that still persist when it comes to peace in my country. This past 3rd of November, we had the National Action Plan, and it was the result of joint work of the government, international cooperation, the UN system, and women organizations and women-led organizations. This included proposals that were innovative to address the agenda of women, peace, and security, and to focus on intersectional security. And this provided an integral and comprehensive view when it came to risk and security and the many impacts that are felt when it comes to discrimination. Human security has an intersection and it has a gender approach, and it highlights the differentiated impacts that women, due to violence and discrimination, face in all levels, as well as the impact of inequality and justice when it comes to human rights. In this regard, including this approach means that in Colombia, we are promoting the best conditions that will ensure a way to address discrimination that impact women, and we can think about the militarization and the use of weapons to achieve peace and security. Finally, I would like to highlight that this plan was drafted in 2024, and the goal was to strengthen the role of women in territorial peace building through the implementation of several strategic lines. One of them is that women who are guardians of peace, health and well-being for women and children. 3, life free of weapons. And 4, access to justice for women and girls who are victims of violence. And 5, protection of territories that have been subjected to extractive actions, and also the humanity and lives of women and refugees and immigrants. Thank you very much for allowing me to share that. Thank you, Colombia.
To the delegation of Panama.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, Madam Chair. Given this is the first time that I have taken the floor, please allow me to wish you every success, not only to the chairmanship, but all of those who work with you as you discharge your mission. And I also like to commend Flavio Luis Olivera Pinto, Managing Director of the Secretariat of the Inter-American Defense Board. Today, I would like to ask permission to contribute to the theme, Empowering Women as Catalysts of Sustainable Peace and Inclusive Security, Best Practices Across the Americas. I would like to start with a small story from my country, the Republic of Panama. In 1903, when we created the military body, in 1947, the National Guard, and then in 1950, we included the first female police officer, and in 1978, we had for the first time a military nurse that was a woman. In 1990, we had a total of 1,133 women who were included in different areas of security. I would like to highlight some of the achievements in Panama when it comes to fighting against the discrimination of women. There's a law from 1995 that was focused on preventing and punishing and eradicating violence against women. There is a law from 1999 that focuses on equal opportunities for women. And we also created the Ministry for Women in the Republic of Panama. A key matter on the 2030 agenda, which includes the 17 SDGs established in the security factors, we have public security in Panama as well. And this is made up of actions as we work with the UN on number 5, gender equality. That means a greater implication, greater involvement of women in the armed forces throughout the hemisphere. Women are included in the armed forces, and they are constructive elements, and they have the backing of our government and the National Assembly of Panama. Public policies on gender equality, and when it comes to opportunities, we have a equity and equity office, and their main goal is to empower the role of women in the ranks of the national police, because they perform a key role at all levels, whether this is organizational, operational, tactical, or creating links with all levels of security and different institutions. The role of women within the security hierarchy is key because it helps us to be more efficient and effective, because these women are trained in gender equality, and their human capacity and intelligence allows them to promote areas where we can promote peace. And this is an important pillar for the country. We should continue working on training women within the security sphere with campaigns and workshops and awareness, seminars, legal training, together with other institutions. For example, the Institute for Women, in order to strengthen awareness and the empowerment of women with equal opportunities. More than anything, to prevent discrimination against women. We need to continue including women in decision-making spheres. This is positive in order to promote the role of women so that they continue to be catalyzers of sustainable peace. We're looking at analysts and decision makers on sensitive decisions when it comes to human rights. Currently, the Ministry of Public Security of the Republic of Panama has public resources, and they're working with more than 300 women, 11 of which hold high-ranking positions. Among the different levels of security, we have more than 4,203 women trained and included in the police force. They have been covering operational matters, and these have been women who have been leading administrative exercises as well. They have been fighting against drug trafficking. They have been participating in investigations as well. And when it comes to the security sphere, we have 85% of the staff is men, only 15% are women. So we would like to highlight that currently, for the second time, we have assigned a general inspector who is a woman. And we would like to say that in 2004, for the first time, we had a general secretary who was a woman. Today, we have female officials who are holding positions of chief, of transportation, of telecommunications, of general services, and assistant directors. We also have women occupying those positions as well. This is historic for women in the Republic of Panama. Our country supports a large part of the security apparatus, and women play an important role. And when it comes to laying down weapons and in building nations of peace, equity, and justice. And they are able to achieve this and achieve a better world when the realities are seen from the point of view of women in society today. I would like to conclude with this proverb: an appreciative women will be honored and will have wealth and riches. Thank you very much.
Much, Panama. I'm pleased to offer the floor to the delegation of Peru to make an intervention.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Peru would like to thank you for convening this joint session with the Committee on Hemispheric Security and the IADB. They are quite well represented by women. So to address the issue of empowerment of women as catalysts of sustainable peace and inclusive security, we have taken due note of the presentations today as well as the shared experiences when it comes to women leadership in public security and national defense. We have listened carefully to the opportunities and challenges that women face, particularly through this organization. So I would like to commend the Minister of Interior and Police of the Dominican Republic, Ms. Farid Raful. Thank you for your presentation. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to address the report by the IADB to address the agenda of women, peace, and security in the hemisphere. Thank you to General Flavio and Colonel Rocio Manzano. So violence and discrimination against women is a serious problem throughout the world, and it has a special connotation in this region. This violence doesn't just affect the human rights of women, but it also has a harmful effect on peace and security of our societies. The WPS agenda, through Resolution 1325 of the UN Security Council, brings new attention to the gender perspective when it comes to the activities of the armed forces and the police. We also would like to highlight the importance of increasing the participation of women in decision-making spheres when it comes to prevention and conflict resolution. Peru is committed to promote gender equality and women empowerment, as well as preventing and eradicating violence against women. Therefore, Peru adopted diverse policies on a national level and as part of its foreign policy. So we have ratified a convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women and the Inter-American Convention on the Prevention and the Eradication of Violence Against Women. I would like to highlight once again that after 200 years, for the first time in Peru, we have a female president, a woman who currently is leading the armed forces and the national police. This is a milestone for our country. Just like the president of the republic, over time, women have gained greater and more important space. The number of women who are in these spaces are almost 13%, and they make up almost 13% of the military staff. But we still have a great deal to do. Chair, Peru is doing everything possible to promote the inclusion and the leadership of women in governmental spaces, not only in security but in defense. And since 2021, Peru has a national action plan to implement solutions from the Security Council called Inclusion. So this new plan is a fundamental tool to strengthen the coherent and normative implementation of regulation to include women in this sector. Also, our goal is to empower women when it comes to women, peace, and security, and to raise awareness over the historic participation of women in defense across the nation. In line with the International Day of Women, starting 2023, the Ministry of Defense on the 9th of March had the Day of Military Women. And this was a public recognition of female participation in the national military sphere. In this context, we urge greater and significant participation of women in women, peace, and security throughout the Americas, as well as the decision-making sphere, and when it comes to training of women leaders on this matter. Thank you, Chair.
Gracias a la
Thank you to Peru. I now offer the floor to the delegation of El Salvador. Thank you kindly, Chair. My delegation would like to congratulate you and other members of the IADB, and thank you for convening this joint session. And we also thank the panelists for their presentations. We are pleased to have this session to highlight the role of women in public security and national defense, as well as the peace building process. Through Resolution 1325 by the UN Security Council in 2000, and relevant resolutions, this has all contributed to this goal. Despite the advances and the action plans, such as the national action plans underway, there are still challenges when it comes to implementing these goals. Chair, El Salvador has a national committee which is interinstitutional to promote and to implement Resolution 1325, and it is a mechanism to make sure that we comply with this resolution. As part of our National Action Plan, in October 2024, we came up with a Women, Peace, and Security course, and the goal is to provide basic information on the Women, Peace, and Security agenda and the National Action Plan for the Resolution 1325, as well as an application phase that will focus on gender and a culture of peace. Also, in November 2024, we had a photographic exposition highlighting women who were murdered in the massacre of Mosote. And we want to highlight the role of women in building and maintaining peace and to promote reflection on the importance of transitional justice and those victims of the armed conflicts, not only just women, but children as well. Currently, we are coming up with an evaluation process for 2022-2024, and this will help our third plan. It will be a tool to guide the implementation of the resolution on a national level, including strategies to increase full and equal participation of women as they build peace. With international efforts, we understand the role of women is key in peacekeeping and their role in the UN. As a troop contributing nation, we understand it's important to identify the challenges to participation of women when it comes to consolidating and building peace. Chair, as true agents of change and transformers, women need to have greater representation in these institutions and regional and international institutions as well when it comes to women, peace, and security. We have a great deal to do so that women are on equal footing and are equally represented in these processes when it comes to defense and security and building and maintaining peace, and when it comes to international security, when it comes to dialogue as well. Because when we have these spaces and exchange opportunities, we're able to strengthen cooperation, and with the help of the member states, through their national strategies. These are all fundamental aspects to achieve our goals. Thank you very much, Chair.
Gracias, Embajadora.
Thank you, Ambassador.
To the delegation of Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. First, I would like to reiterate our condolences to the families and the victims of the dozens of people who lost their life yesterday in the tragic accident that happened a few kilometers from here. I'd like to greet everybody at the top table, and right now made up of 3 distinguished ladies and 2 compatriots. It's a point of great pride. Madam Chairman, Brazil reaffirms its commitment to the agenda of women and security and for the full implementation of 1325 from the Security Council, promoting specific concrete steps in the participation in the area of defense and security. In the last few years, we have seen significant progress made in the inclusion of women in the armed forces, as was mentioned by Colonel Simone Cardoza from the Brazilian Air Force. Right now, more than 35,000 women are part of our armed forces. This is 10% of the total. But in addition to the quantitative aspect, the qualitative aspect also stands out. It's increasingly more frequent to promote women in high positions in our armed forces, and we're very proud of that. These victories show recognition of the competence and the role of women play in armed forces and reflects Brazil's commitment when it comes to gender equality in areas of security. In addition to the success of the volunteer listing that we have today, I would like to say we received more than 22,000 nominees or candidates in more than a month. Also, let me just point out the opening of a new public federal competition for the selection of civil experts in the Ministry of Defense of Brazil. Here we're talking about an unprecedented initiative which values highly qualified professionals for planning and in crafting strategic policies for national security. But in addition to the defense areas, diplomacy has increasingly more women who have been interested and who are interested in this topic, both in Brasilia as well as in posts abroad. For the last administration of Brazil and the Security Council, for example, various women diplomats played an outstanding role in crafting and in carrying out the initiatives that have to do with peace and security, thus contributing for the agenda to make great strides with a different, renewed perspective. There are challenges to take on, many, and one of the most important is the invisible barriers that oftentimes limit the full-fledged participation of women. Brazil believes that the role of women is where they would like to be it in the public policy arena, in the battlefield, or international relations for building peace. We have to guarantee that no door is closed for them and their talent, dedication, and leadership, and that they have to be fully recognized. Brazil continues to invest in measures that ensure greater female representation in the area of security and peace, and we believe that inclusion and diversity are fundamental to build more fair and safe societies. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Brazil. Obrigada. The chair recognizes the delegation of Canada.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Madam Chair. Greetings to all in the room and around the virtual table. We wish to thank all of today's speakers for sharing your invaluable expertise with us. Canada is proud to reaffirm its unwavering commitment to women, peace, and security agenda, a cornerstone of inclusive and sustainable peace building. We firmly believe that the meaningful participation in women in all aspects of peace and security is essential for achieving equitable, effective, and lasting solutions to the challenges we face as a hemisphere. Through our feminist foreign policy and initiatives like the ELSI Initiative for Women in Peace Operations, Canada works to address systemic barriers and to amplify the voices of women leaders, peace builders, and security professionals worldwide. As we reflect on best practices, Canada remains steadfast in promoting gender equality, human rights, and accountability as guiding principles for advancing the agenda. Together, we must ensure that our collective efforts contribute to a more inclusive and secure future for all. Madam Chair, we look forward to further contributing to the compendium of best practices, making it an evergreen document, and we firmly believe that it will be an excellent resource. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Delegation of Canada. I'm pleased to offer the floor to the delegation of the Dominican Republic. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. We commend those at the table. Thank you, Secretary Marquez, Secretary Mora, and Lieutenant General Flavio Luis Oliveira. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Chair, my delegation would like to echo the calls for solidarity from the United States, and our condolences are extended to the families and victims of that terrible air crash that happened just a few miles from the headquarters of the OAS. So our heart goes out to those who lost their lives. So on this matter that brings us here today, I would like to thank all of the panelists for providing their presentations regarding the important role of women in peace and security and the advancements made in our region. More specifically, we highlight the role of our Minister of Interior and Police, Ms. Faridi Raful. It's another example of how we are including women in the area of security. It is fundamental to continue consolidating best practices throughout the region for the inclusion and the empowerment of women to support sustainable peace building and security. This will allow us to conduct concrete actions that will foster ongoing action in this area. In addition to what we're doing in DR, and Dr. Raful spoke about this, I would like to highlight some of the actions implemented by the Ministry of Defense in our country. They have promoted greater involvement of women in areas that are traditionally occupied by men in the military sphere. One of these actions has to do with the development of a plan for effective implementation of Resolution 1325 from the UN Security Council. And this has allowed us to increase the participation of women in the Dominican Armed Forces. Although the quota of participation is not what we want, we still want to say that this is a tool to reduce the gender gap. The Director of Development and Equity for the Ministry of Defense, Ms. Domingo Basabal, highlighted that it is key that women continue participating on equal footing and actively and provide their unique qualities when it comes to establishing and consolidating all of the peace processes. This is necessary and key for sustainable peace in our hemisphere. On the other hand, we have conducted awareness raising tasks, not just with women, but with men as well. An example of this are the training programs on public policies and methodologies that focus on masculinity. So with the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of the Women, this has allowed us to address this matter through co-responsibility. These opportunities have allowed us to think and strengthen a culture of respect, gender equality, and to build a society that is fairer for all people. Chair, in conclusion, I would like to reiterate what was already expressed previously during this Committee on Hemispheric Security, and that is a significant achievement of having for the first time a leadership that is fully run by women. And so this is a milestone when it comes to the defense of the region, when it comes to multilateralism. So it is up to us to continue moving forward so that when we look back, we can be proud of the path that we have taken and to motivate others to continue forging a more inclusive path from the point of view of women and to continue to support their regional and international efforts for peace and security. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador.
The delegation of Ecuador and offers the floor.
We thank the Committee on Hemispheric Security for including this key matter on the agenda, and we thank the presenters for talking about the best practices in the region. For Ecuador, greater participation of women in the decision-making sphere, as well as when it comes to women, peace, and security, is essential. That is why, as was mentioned by the Director of Human Rights from Ecuador, when it comes to thinking about this matter, we started a national building process to come up with ways to implement Resolution 1325. So we recognize the impacts of conflicts on women and the key role that women play in conflict resolution and peace building. Greater presence of women in peacekeeping missions and diplomacy and preventative diplomacy is key. As our Foreign Affairs Minister mentioned, in Ecuador, it is key to have women involved when we are dealing with these matters of insecurity, violence, crime, and the increase of social conflicts. We have seen how when women are involved, they have a greater impact on the process when it comes to recruiting and when it comes to discrimination. Women are key in these roles as well. Ecuador has come up with an action plan and ways to address different matters, the protection and fighting against violence, the creation of spaces that allow women to speak up and have their voices heard through peacekeeping missions, and the increase of the resilience of communities affected by conflict are key. The first National Plan of Action for Women, Peace, and Security shows the commitment of Ecuador and the different national entities that are working on security, peace, and justice with the implementation of a National Peace and Security Plan of Action. Thank you very much for allowing me to share that.
Ecuador. And finally, the floor is offered to the delegation of Chile.
Thank you, Chair. A warm welcome to all of the colleagues present. We thank you for the work that allows us to address this matter, not only when it comes to the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, through empowering women as catalysts of sustainable peace and inclusive security. This commitment is closely linked to the international agenda. It has had a positive impact in my country in the building of a fairer, safer, and more inclusive nation for all women. On a national level, one of the most important advancements when it comes to women, peace, and security has been the progressive inclusion of women in the armed forces and in the police institutional framework, particularly since 2018. And when it comes to the gender approach, we are working with public policy. Also, we have increased significantly the participation of women in the armed forces, the Army, the Air Force, and women in operational roles and leadership roles. This participation is not only helping with gender equality, but also allowing us to be more inclusive. And when it comes to decision making, we are more effective. When it comes to our achievements, we have made great steps when it comes to specialized units, when it comes to fighting against gender-based violence, and we are including women in high-ranking positions. And this contributes to policies that will help us affect victims of violence. And when it comes to public policies, we have made great advances when it comes to national defense and security. In 2024, the national defense worked on this area. And we have a strategic framework that includes the active participation of women in decision-making spheres when it comes to defense and security and when it comes to responding to crisis. So this will ensure that women are not just present in the armed forces, but it ensures that they are in roles of leadership and are key leaders in strategy. Also, when it comes to investigations being conducted in Chile, training is being conducted on gender equality to make sure that we can prevent gender-based violence and empowering women within these institutions. A key aspect of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda is the fight against gender-based violence. In this regard, Chile implemented several reforms to make sure that law enforcement acts in a way that is respectful. Last year, the police and the armed forces have a specific protocol to address cases of domestic violence and gender-based violence that allow for an appropriate approach to address victims. Also, we have a gender-based prevention approach, working with specialized units that will help victims, and have community strategies to foster communication with women-led civil society organizations. A key aspect has to do with our development of our feminist foreign policy and our commitment to gender equality and the empowering of women around the world. This has been a pillar of Chilean diplomacy, particularly as a member state of the OAS, where we are seeking solutions that will promote the rights of women and their participation, their full participation in our work and through all pillars of our organization. Chile is committed to the promotion of the women, peace, and security agenda around the world, promoting policies that will have women involved in the peacekeeping process and the conflict resolution process as well. We are also promoting the involvement of more women in peacekeeping missions with the UN and actively participating in aspects of Resolution 1325 as well when it comes to decision-making and women, peace, and security. In conclusion, all of this work has allowed us to become more inclusive, not just in Chile, but also on an international stage. However, to consolidate this work, we have to keep working on public policies that will ensure the full participation of women in all decision-making spaces, not only on a national level, but internationally. That's why we believe it's important to have a compendium of best practices in the hemisphere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chile. There being no additional requests for the floor, the committee takes note of the presentations received today and the interventions made by delegations. We now take steps to bring this meeting to a fitting conclusion. In that regard, I'm pleased to offer the floor to the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Estimada Alejandra Mora Mora, who will present remarks as we wrap up with conclusions of today's meetings. Estimada Secretary.
Now, may I take the floor? Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'd like to greet the IDB Secretary General, and greet everybody here. As always, I'd truly like to thank the Committee on Hemispheric Security for all of the work it does alongside the Inter-American Defense Board. And thank you for the invitation to share this space. We spoke last year about leadership. Now we're talking about empowerment. These are two fundamental issues. You can't lead if you are not empowered to do so. So I think that today we have really heard about very hopeful topics given the efforts that people are making here. Before I get into conclusions as the Inter-American Committee, let me just echo the comments of condolences for the tragic accident that took place in Washington and our solidarity and support to the victims and their families. Some points which I think are crucial, and this is how this Resolution 1325 has increasingly had more voice in the different arenas, not only interpretation in the strict terms of security, in which we have different scenarios which are increasingly innovative, like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and trafficking, and what's going on with climate change and migrants, but all of the conflicts that exist in our society, such as the social conflicts, polarization, things that emerge from democracies, so that the spearheading factor of what we're talking about women in peace and security, not only has to do with what we understood before, but also has to do with a new way of understanding peace in a positive and negative sense. And that is why it is so important to have the discussion that we're having. Now, I wanted to make a comment and say that there's a UN study from 2018 in which they speak about how 35% possibilities of having lasting peace. How are you going to have that if you don't have women involved? And in this study, there is a host of different data. But I just wanted to point out, in terms of the efforts that have been made, as other countries have spoken about, we are still only a quarter way across the river before we get to the next shore. And the data that's out there, and every time that we hear that this is the first time that a woman comes in, or this is the first time that efforts are being made along this line, we realize what is really happening. And in the last few years, the United Nations is also drawing attention to the fact that between 2020 and 2022, representation of women in the mediation processes have fallen. It was at 23%, it fell to 16%. So also, women who head up processes, only four, oh, only one participated in peace agreements that were struck last year in 2023. They were signed by women or when women were present, and one out of every three agreements, including provisions that referred to women, girls, and gender, so that with those, we understand the efforts that are being made, but also we understand a lot of pending issues that have to be taken care of. So in that regard, I should like to highlight some of the conclusions that states have put. And the first is that plans and strategies are the work of states, and this has to continue to be done. And thanks for Chile and Colombia and some of these processes, as has been mentioned. Here, in terms of the intersection of women in the processes, I think that it's really interesting to have heard that women want to be there, that when women are called in, women show up. We're not hidden, women are not hidden, nobody is saying no, and this is really very important when it comes to designing public policies. Another thing that I think is important, and I'd like to draw your attention to, what are the conditions when women are called on? Are they prepared to receive, or are people ready to receive women? And there are a host of different things that women have done, or I should say that the countries have done in terms of the adequate spaces, the appropriate places, and in dealing with issues that have to do with women's needs, from everything that is specific to women, and that call for the adequate or appropriate spaces so that women can be called on. And I think that this takes into account a structural issue, which is a cultural change, because a cultural change has to do with these symbols and the rituals that recreate a space that has been predominant for men, where the rituals and signs have been in the hands of men, and that's why we talk about cultural changes. We have to talk about this, and in addition to other things, we don't want to include these sexist goats, because people talk about not permitting violence, which has been watered down by all of the efforts that we've been making, but there are a host of other manifestations as well that hamstring or that restrict women's opportunities. And of course, we have to talk about training, capacity building, so that we can have more competence. This is a topic which is of vital interest, and it's absolutely important, and it's included in each and every one of the talks that we have had. Women in decision-making posts. Well, this is a crucial challenge. This is a challenge for each and every one of the arenas, but of course, it would be a challenge in those spaces where we have male predominance. We have said that it's not the same to come in and talk about this, but what about breaking the glass ceiling? We have to iron out the broken escalators and all of these things that don't work. These are all issues that contain women and their opportunities in all of these arenas, and their presence is absolutely strategic. So I also want to talk about the request that was made by looking at multilateralism. It's really an honor to be able to accompany these kinds of processes here in the OAS. The OAS has had a very specific strategic vision when it comes to these issues, and that is why it's really very important to continue working and to honor the work that has been done. I would also like to point out that we have to change the leadership narrative of women. We have to recognize that these are key agents when it comes to building trust, having coordination, carrying out logistics, cooperative work, and access to communities, prevention, negotiation. And the most important that I yet have to say in these conclusions is the need to reflect that we're talking about capacities that women show that lead to more effective work. This is what this discussion is all about. We're talking about rights, we're talking about strategy, and we're talking about a resolution that can highlight capacities and abilities that women have. In Costa Rica, I remember that there was a protest in defense of the people, and people were asked the Minister of Security how they were going to solve this, and they said, well, they were going to put all women in the civil forces of Costa Rica in the front of the protest march, and this is very iconic. This is part and parcel of some of the points that are associated to the values and to women's identity. And here we have to use this in a positive way so that this space opens up. It's not just a question of talking about women in these spaces, but thank you very much, Madam Chair, for allowing me to reconfigure and reconceptualize this strategic work that you and the committee are doing. Thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon.
Secretaria Mora Mora, estamos todos y todas en la lucha para una.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for pointing out that we need to have a much more across-the-board inclusion of women for long-lasting peace, in which all men and women alike have a commitment, and as such, a crucial and basic role to play for strengthening hemispheric security and even global security. In English, thank you very much.
As I close this important meeting, I invite you to reflect on the substantial debates that have taken place, underscoring just how evident it is that increasing the participation and leadership of women in the field of security and defense is indispensable for achieving sustained peace and security in all of our nations. The best practices and experiences shared highlight the progress we have made on this critical issue. Notwithstanding, we must continue to work steadfastly to strengthen our efforts at ensuring that the policies and practices of our respective governments align with the goals set by UN Women, Peace and Security, WPS agenda. It must be our objective to shape a future in which women are not just participants, but leaders in the field of security and defense, a future in which the security of our nations is reinforced by the value brought to bear by the diversity of their leaders. Distinguished colleagues, it has been a successful day because of your presence and in large measure due to the excellent presentations we have listened to and learned from. Thanks to our panelists, to whom I extend thanks on your behalf. Today's meeting is adjourned. Pardon?